The bar was dimly lit, the low hum of conversation punctuated by the occasional clink of glasses and bursts of laughter from Marines unwinding after another grueling day at camp. The air smelled faintly of stale beer, cigarette smoke, and sweat, a mixture that spoke of hours of shared camaraderie, bravado, and temporary freedom. In the corner, away from the lights and the center of attention, slid onto a high stool. She was an unremarkable figure to the casual observer. Mid-30s, athletic yet understated, with chestnut hair tied loosely behind her head and eyes that seemed to study the room without committing to any particular gaze. She ordered a whiskey neat, without drawing attention to herself, and sipped it slowly, listening. To anyone glancing her way, she was just another woman in the bar, quiet and solitary. But inside, her mind moved faster than most could ever hope to comprehend. Years of special forces training, countless covert operations, and survival in hostile environments had honed her instincts to a razor's edge. Every movement of the patrons, every flicker of expression, every sound, the scrape of a chair, the whisper of someone drawing near, was logged, analyzed, and filed away. She had learned long ago that in a room like this, nothing went unnoticed. Her mission was straightforward but dangerous: gather intelligence on a suspected weapons smuggling ring operating near the military base. Recent reports suggested involvement of personnel she could easily encounter here during off-duty hours. The problem wasn't just collecting information, it was remaining invisible while doing so. Most people underestimated her because she looked like a civilian, and that made her the perfect observer. Across the room, Staff Sergeant Cole laughed boisterously, slamming his glass down on the bar. He was a classic Marine stereotype, broad-shouldered, confident to the point of arrogance, and prone to misreading his surroundings. Had recently been passed over for promotion, and the bruised ego had found its solace in alcohol. He scanned the bar like a predator seeking prey. That's when his eyes fell on, small, solitary, quiet. To him, that was an invitation, or at least a challenge. Felt his gaze almost immediately, though she did not turn her head. Her senses were attuned to everything: the vibrations through the floor, the subtle changes in his posture, the way his shoulders tensed before he made a move. She could read him as clearly as if she'd memorized every line of a classified document. Was dangerous, yes, but predictable. Overconfidence and lack of discipline were traits she had seen countless times in the field. They often spelled their own downfall. Allowed herself a slow, deliberate sip of whiskey, keeping her face neutral, her eyes flicking just enough to monitor the room. The bar's energy was thick, almost tangible, and she was swimming through it like a diver moving beneath a stormy surface. Every laugh, shout, and cheer was a potential threat vector. Every conversation could be a lead. Her intuition whispered that tonight might not be just a routine observation. Fueled by alcohol and ego, had already begun walking toward her. Each step was deliberate, punctuated by the kind of swagger that was meant to intimidate but often only exposed insecurity. Didn't flinch. She didn't need to. The element of surprise was on her side. Years of training had taught her that patience often mattered more than speed, that the moment you acted before it was necessary, you could lose control. She watched his approach, analyzing the probability of his actions, considering both defensive and offensive responses. As he neared, leaned slightly toward her, flashing a grin meant to be charming but landing more as aggressive. "Hey there," he said, loud enough for his friends to hear. "What's a little lady like you doing all alone?" His lips curved faintly, a neutral expression that hid the sharp edge of her awareness. She kept her voice soft, steady, unassuming. "Waiting," she replied, nothing more. Her tone had no weakness, no fear. That single word carried subtle authority, the kind only someone trained to command a room without raising their voice could wield. Didn't understand that. He interpreted her calmness as disrespect. His friends cheered him on, egging him toward confrontation. The mix of alcohol, bravado, and wounded pride made him reckless. He slammed his hand onto her table, not enough to harm, he thought, just enough to assert dominance. His body reacted instinctively. She shifted her stance, grounding herself, muscles coiling in readiness, but she did not retaliate. Not yet. She wanted him to commit fully. Overextension made him predictable. The bar seemed to quiet around them. Patrons sensed the tension even if they didn't understand its cause. Gaze never wavered. Unaware of the storm before him, chuckled, thinking he was playing a game she hadn't yet learned. In truth, he was the one being studied, every motion, every reaction catalogued, analyzed for weakness. A mere shove against her shoulder would be enough to unleash a response that could incapacitate him, but she waited. Patience was her weapon tonight, and was about to give her the opening she needed. For a long moment, time seemed to stretch. Observe the tiny signs of aggression, the clenching of fists, the shifting weight from foot to foot, that betrayed his intent. Was unaware that in under 5 seconds she could neutralize him without ever spilling a drop of her drink. She could see the trajectory of this encounter clearly. Unless he backed down, he would become a lesson in humility, a casualty not of his physical strength but of his lack of awareness. Her mind wandered briefly to her mission. The Marines in this bar were potentially tied to the smuggling operation she had been tracking. Might be irrelevant, or he might be a thread that, once pulled, unraveled the entire knot. That single shove was the test and had no intention of failing it. She allowed a hint of patience to lace her body, her frame relaxed, her senses heightened. Her eyes flicked toward the exit, noting every possible escape and entry point, the locations of any security cameras, the clusters of patrons who might inadvertently interfere. Leaned closer, oblivious to the danger, his grin widening. "Don't just sit there, sweetheart, say something." His eyes locked with his. There was no fear, no hesitation, only control, calm, and the faintest hint of warning. "Step back," she said, her voice soft but impossible to ignore. The bar seemed to hold its breath. Staff Sergeant Cole didn't take the warning seriously. The word "step back" barely registered in his foggy, alcohol-soaked mind. He was used to being the center of attention, used to people reacting to his presence, not the other way around. He leaned closer, towering over as if sheer size could intimidate her. "Step back," he repeated, his tone dripping with mockery. "You think you can tell me what to do, little lady?" The laughter of his friends behind him only fueled his arrogance. To them, this was another harmless confrontation, another chance to assert himself and entertain the crowd. None of them realized that the quiet woman at the table wasn't just unafraid, she was calculating. Every muscle in her body was coiled, her mind moving faster than his drunken bravado could keep up with. Years of fieldwork had conditioned her to detect the faintest shifts in balance, the micro-expressions that revealed intent, the subtle tension in someone's shoulders before a strike. Had stepped into a storm he couldn't see coming. Remained seated, her posture relaxed but her senses were hyperalert. She noted the pattern of his breathing, the slight trembling in his fingers, the angle of his shoulders. Was predictable but dangerous if underestimated. And so far, everyone in the bar, including, believed he was in control. That illusion would not last long. Shoved the chair slightly, bringing himself closer. "I don't take orders from anyone," he said, his voice rising. "Especially not from some desk jockey pretending to be tough." He reached out to tap her shoulder, a move meant to assert dominance. Didn't flinch. She let the contact happen, absorbing the shove with perfect balance, her body unshakable. To the untrained eye she appeared calm, almost passive. But beneath that serene exterior, her brain ran a complex sequence of calculations, angles of potential attack, trajectories, exit strategies, and methods to subdue without killing. Had just unwittingly given her the opening she had been waiting for. The bar seemed to react as if sensing the tension. Conversations dimmed, eyes flicked toward the corner where the confrontation was unfolding. His patience was deliberate. She knew that in any altercation, the first person to act recklessly often lost. Blinded by ego and intoxication, was already moving too quickly. "Back off," said, her voice calm, yet carrying the unmistakable weight of authority. Laughed a harsh, grating sound. "Or what?" he challenged, flexing his arms as if his size alone would win the day. His friends began chanting, encouraging him, egging him toward confrontation. "Show her, Cole. She thinks she's got the upper hand." That was the final piece. Pushed her chair back slightly, rising to her full height, not enough to intimidate physically, but just enough to reveal the controlled strength in her stance. Misread her movement entirely. He assumed she was panicking, preparing to defend herself poorly. What he didn't know was that she had trained for these scenarios for years, that every microsecond of his aggression had been predicted and rehearsed in her mind. He lunged, reckless and forceful, aiming to push her backward again, shifted her weight with fluid precision, sidestepping his momentum. In the span of a heartbeat, she had positioned herself behind him, her movements so subtle that most people wouldn't have noticed. Thrown off balance, stumbled forward, his momentum carrying him closer to the bar. Gasps echoed from the crowd. Some laughed nervously, thinking it was a staged stunt. Others froze, realizing this was far more serious than a barroom spat. Spun around, eyes wide with surprise, but was already there, calm, precise, ready to react. "You don't understand who you're dealing with," she said softly, but each word cut through the noise with lethal clarity. The first physical exchange was brief but decisive, moved with surgical efficiency, redirecting weight and using his own aggression against him. His strength, his anger, and his momentum all became tools she wielded, controlling the flow of the encounter without ever raising her voice or appearing violent. His friends tried to intervene, rushing forward, but she anticipated every move. A subtle step here, a shift of the shoulder there, and they were redirected harmlessly away. By the time realized what had happened, he was on the floor, stunned and disoriented. Pain radiated from his shoulder and back, and the humiliation hit harder than any physical blow could. He stared up at, confusion and fear mingling with a slow, dawning respect, or perhaps terror. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. Instead, she calmly adjusted her stance, surveying the room. Every Marine present now understood that the woman they had underestimated was no ordinary civilian. Rumors of her, whispers of a female Special Forces operative known only in hushed circles, suddenly felt real, had confirmed the legends with a single display of controlled force. A sharp whistle cut through the tension. Military police were approaching, summoned by a bartender who had wisely decided not to intervene personally. Backed up slightly, allowing the authorities to take control without unnecessary escalation. Still on the floor, scrambled to his feet, his pride utterly shattered. Major Harrison arrived moments later, his eyes scanning the scene. Recognition flickered across his face when he saw. He motioned discreetly for her to follow him to a quieter space. Without hesitation, the bar now a chessboard where she had moved the first, decisive pieces. Watched helplessly, realizing that he had underestimated not just her skill, but her entire existence. Once in private, Major Harrison whispered urgently, "Are you hurt? Did he compromise the mission?" Shook her head, her face composed. "No, the mission is intact, but he's a liability, and if I'm correct, he's not alone." The words sent a chill through Harrison. His reckless behavior, his aggression, had been no accident. It was symptomatic of something larger, a network of poor discipline, perhaps even corruption, that had been sent to investigate. She had walked into a situation expecting observation, not confrontation, yet the encounter had revealed far more than anyone in the room could have imagined. Back in the bar, whispers spread. The patrons who had witnessed the scene debated what they had just seen. Some swore it was a fight, others a display of skill, and a few, the perceptive ones, knew that they had glimpsed the capabilities of someone far beyond ordinary understanding. Sat quietly at his bravado gone, replaced with a simmering mix of fear, confusion, and wounded ego. Returned to her mission with the same calm she had arrived with. The bar incident had been revealing, not just for the Marines present, but for herself. It confirmed suspicions, tested reactions, and provided insight into the personalities she might have to contend with later. Most importantly, it reminded her that underestimation was the enemy, and that patience, control and perception were weapons just as lethal as any firearm. As she left the bar later that night, slipping into the shadows without anyone truly noticing, reflected on what had just occurred. A Marine had struck her, not realizing she was a ghost in the field, a special forces operative in plain sight. It was a mistake he, and others like him, would never repeat. The night had only begun, and the mission stretched far beyond this barroom skirmish. Walked silently, a shadow moving through the city, already calculating the next steps, already prepared for whatever the recklessness of others might throw her way. The bar had returned to its usual hum, though an invisible tension still lingered in the air, like static before a storm. Patrons whispered among themselves, stealing glances at the corner where the confrontation had unfolded. The initial clash between and Staff Sergeant Cole had left more than bruised egos. It had left questions, rumors, and an unmistakable realization. The quiet woman at the table was far more than she seemed. Sat back in his chair, red-faced, trying to regain composure. His friends offered half-hearted encouragement, but their confidence faltered when they glanced at. Her gaze remained calm, unyielding, and utterly unreadable. His pride, however, was a storm that could not be ignored. He felt humiliated, both physically and socially. To a man like him, respect was measured in dominance, not restraint, and being bested in a bar by someone he assumed was a civilian challenged everything he thought he knew about power. Each nerve in his body screamed for retaliation, for reassertion of authority. Yet there was a subtle hesitation now, a flicker of doubt that had expertly seeded. She did not move to provoke him further, nor did she back down. She sat, calm and composed, observing him carefully, reading his posture, breathing in. In the Special Forces, moments like this were crucial. The wrong reaction could escalate a situation beyond control. Knew how volatile was, how reckless, and how dangerous, particularly when fueled by alcohol and wounded pride. He was predictable, and she intended to use that to her advantage. Swirled the remainder of his drink in the glass, staring at with a mixture of contempt and fascination. "You think you're tough, huh?" he muttered under his breath, barely audible to anyone but her. His eyes flickered, noting the tightening of his jaw, the shift of weight from one foot to the other, the subtle cues of someone preparing for physical aggression. His next move came without hesitation. Leaned forward suddenly, shoving again, harder this time, attempting to force a reaction. The bar erupted into chatter and laughter, a mixture of shock and bravado. Most people assumed this was a playful exchange, a barroom scuffle, nothing serious, but had recognized the intent behind the shove immediately. This was not an accident, intended to test her. He intended to provoke a reaction. Her response was deliberate and precise. She shifted her body slightly to absorb the force, stepping just enough to maintain perfect balance. Then, with a fluid motion that would seem almost casual to the untrained eye, she executed a controlled counter. Already off balance from his aggressive lunge, felt himself propelled forward in a way he could neither predict nor control. Time seemed to stretch in those moments. Patrons froze mid-sip, bartenders paused mid-clean, and friends shouted, caught between cheering and panic. His movements were economy itself. Every step, every turn, every shift of weight had purpose. In one seamless motion, she had neutralized his forward momentum without overextending herself or causing unnecessary harm. To anyone watching, it looked like a simple maneuver. But in reality, it was the product of years of rigorous training, split-second decision-making, and battlefield experience. Hit the floor with a thud, the air knocked out of him. Pain radiated through his shoulder and back, but the sting of humiliation cut deeper. He struggled to rise, confusion clouding his vision. What are you?" he stammered, the bravado draining from his voice. Didn't answer. She remained poised, calm, scanning the rest of the bar with a practiced eye. A subtle tilt of her head, a measured breath, and the room's attention shifted fully onto her. It was clear now to anyone paying attention that she was not only capable of defending herself but was dangerously competent. Rumors of a female Special Forces operative had always existed in whispers, in hushed conversations among select circles. Now, the whispers had become reality in front of their eyes. Friends rushed forward instinctively, some to intervene, others to protect him, anticipated every move. With slight pivots, she redirected their advances without striking a single one, using balance and weight to keep them at bay. Her calmness in the chaos unnerved them. The larger the crowd, the more control she displayed. The bar had become her arena, and she was the master of it. "Enough," she said softly, her voice carrying through the tension like steel. "Step back or you will regret it." No one moved. Still on the floor, finally understood that this was no ordinary confrontation. Fear mingled with disbelief in his eyes. He had struck a soldier, a trained operative, without realizing it. And in doing so, he had revealed not just his lack of control, but also the dangerous network of recklessness that could threaten more than just his pride. At that moment, the bartender wisely called the military police, signaling them discreetly to intervene. The tension didn't ease, but it shifted. The room now waited, collectively holding its breath, as prepared to leave the confrontation in the hands of authority, though not before sending a silent, unmistakable message. Underestimating her was a mistake that could have cost them dearly. The first strike had been decisive, but knew it was only the beginning. Her mission required patience, observation, and subtlety. Behavior had confirmed something she had suspected. The smuggling network she was tracking might be closer than anticipated, and reckless operatives like him could inadvertently expose the operation, or worse, compromise it entirely. Once the military police arrived, allowed them to take control, struggled to his feet, shaken not by physical pain but by the revelation that he had misjudged her completely. Major Harrison appeared shortly after, recognizing her immediately. He guided her to a quiet corner to debrief privately. His calm demeanor never wavered. The chaos of the bar was already behind her, a field of controlled disruption she had mastered. "Are you hurt?" Harrison asked, a trace of concern in his voice. "No," replied, her voice soft but firm. "The mission remains intact, but he's a liability, and there's a chance others like him are involved." Harrison's face hardened. The implications were clear. Had been reckless, yes, but his actions were symptomatic of a larger issue, a potential threat to security and protocol. Had walked into a routine observation mission, but it had escalated into a live test of skill, control, and intelligence. And she had emerged unscathed, proving both her ability and the depth of her training. Back in the bar, whispers circulated. Patrons debated the scene, some thinking it was a simple barroom scuffle, others convinced they had witnessed something extraordinary. Remained a humbled figure, his bravado shattered, while quietly filed away every detail she had observed. Each movement, reaction, and hesitation was logged in her mind for analysis. As she prepared to leave the bar, reflected briefly on the encounter. A Marine had struck her, not realizing she was an undercover Special Forces operative. That misjudgment, combined with his arrogance, had exposed weaknesses, confirmed suspicions, and provided invaluable insight into the environment she was investigating. The night was far from over, and the real mission was just beginning. She slipped into the shadows of the city, invisible once more, a ghost among the living, ready to pursue the threads actions had revealed. The first strike had been more than a demonstration of skill, it had been a warning. Anyone who underestimated her now knew the price of arrogance, had made a critical mistake, and its quiet dominance had ensured that he and others would remember it. The bar was just the beginning. The storm she was about to unleash had only just begun. The bar had returned to its usual rhythm, but the atmosphere was irrevocably altered. Patrons whispered in tight groups, stealing glances at the corner where the earlier confrontation had unfolded. Stood near her stool, calm and composed, her face betraying none of the calculation and precision she had just exercised. Around her, Marines nursed their drinks, still in disbelief. Some laughed nervously, dismissing what they'd witnessed as a fluke, but others, a perceptive few, recognized the gravity of the situation. The quiet woman they had underestimated moments ago had demonstrated skill, control, and authority far beyond their comprehension. Staff Sergeant Cole sat on the floor, groaning, trying to shake the sting of humiliation from both his body and pride. His friends hovered around him, unsure whether to intervene, scold, or flee. The mixture of confusion, awe, and fear was palpable. His initial bravado had evaporated, leaving only the realization that he had seriously miscalculated. He had struck someone he assumed was ordinary, a woman, alone, unassuming, and had been decisively neutralized in seconds. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. His presence radiated control. She adjusted her jacket, smoothened the folds of her clothing, and surveyed the bar as though nothing had occurred. Yet her mind was already racing, analyzing the behavior of every individual present. Shove had not been random. There had been intent behind it. His aggression had been fueled by ego, yes, but also by underlying knowledge or suspicion of her presence. She had entered this mission expecting observation, not confrontation, and the unexpected escalation had provided insights she could never have gained otherwise. Attempted to rise, swaying slightly as he regained his balance. Who are you?" he stammered, voice trembling with both fear and humiliation. You're not normal." His gaze remained calm, unwavering. "You're right," she said softly, her voice carrying a quiet authority that seemed to ripple through the room. "I'm not normal, and the next time someone underestimates me, it won't be a simple shove. It will be far worse." The words, though spoken quietly, resonated with the patrons around her. Conversations dwindled to murmurs. The laughter had vanished, replaced with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. A few Marines instinctively glanced at each other, sharing unspoken acknowledgement. They had seen something they were not supposed to see, a display of skill that belonged on the battlefield, not in a bar. Knew the ripple effect of her actions extended beyond physical dominance. In special forces, influence was as much about perception as it was about skill. She had demonstrated, without cruelty or unnecessary force, that underestimating her was dangerous. Had learned that lesson immediately. Now the others were internalizing it silently. As regained partial composure, a few of his friends stepped closer, unsure of whether to confront her or retreat. Anticipated their movements effortlessly. A slight pivot, a subtle shift of weight, and their advance stalled without confrontation. Every micro-movement she had observed and calculated during her training came into play. Angles of force, trajectories of motion, psychological impact. Her control over the environment was near absolute. The bartender, sensing the rising tension, discreetly pressed a button under the counter, summoning the military police. Within minutes, uniformed personnel arrived, their presence a stabilizing force. They quickly assessed the scene, nodding on the floor, the hushed whispers of onlookers and calm composure. She allowed them to take control without any interference, knowing that the display of authority had already achieved its purpose. Major Harrison arrived shortly after, his expression a mixture of concern and recognition. He had been briefed on his assignment and knew her capabilities firsthand. Upon seeing the aftermath, he understood the delicate balance she had maintained, neutralizing threats without escalating beyond control. He guided her to a private corner to discuss the incident. Still in shock, realized that his aggression had done more than humiliate him. It had inadvertently exposed vulnerabilities within his own unit. His calm demeanor did not waver as Harrison whispered, "Are you hurt? Did he compromise the mission?" "No," she replied evenly. "The mission remains intact, but he's a liability, and if I'm correct, others in this network may be connected to him." Harrison's face hardened. He understood immediately the implications. Had acted recklessly, yes, but he had also revealed a thread that could unravel a larger problem. His mission had transitioned from simple observation to active intelligence gathering in real time. Her first confrontation had illuminated both behavioral patterns and potential vulnerabilities among personnel connected to a suspected weapons smuggling operation. Back in the bar, The whispers and speculation were growing. Patrons debated whether what they had witnessed was an extraordinary display of skill or sheer luck. Some Marines quietly acknowledged that they had been in the presence of a highly trained operative. Meanwhile, struggled to reconcile his perception of control with the reality of the situation. He had learned a lesson about overconfidence and underestimation, and the sting of humiliation burned far deeper than any physical blow could. His mind was already working ahead. The bar incident had provided more than just an immediate tactical advantage. It had offered a glimpse into the broader network of risk. His behavior was symptomatic of a potential security gap, a vulnerability she could exploit to further her mission. Observing his interactions, his decision-making under pressure, and his friends' reactions gave her valuable insight into the human element of the network she was investigating. The night stretched on, and the patrons gradually returned to their routines, though the lingering energy of the confrontation remained. His presence had altered the dynamics of the bar. She had demonstrated authority without violence, control without chaos. In the quiet moments between interactions, she noted every detail: seating arrangements, conversational patterns, individual behaviors. This intelligence would prove invaluable as her mission progressed. Attempted to speak again, his voice low and uncertain. You're a soldier, aren't you?" His eyes met his, and for the first time a faint smirk touched her lips. "You could say that," she replied, "and you just learned a lesson in humility." He realized then that this was no ordinary confrontation. The woman who had bested him in seconds was a force to be reckoned with, highly trained, highly skilled, and capable of far more than he could comprehend. Fear and respect mingled in his eyes. This was not a civilian spat, nor a simple bar fight. It was a calculated display of expertise that left no room for misinterpretation. As the military police escorted her to a private space, reflected on the encounter. She had arrived expecting to observe, to gather intelligence discreetly. Instead, she had been forced into action, testing her skills under unpredictable conditions. The results were clear, and others like him were liabilities, and the environment was far more complex than anticipated. Yet, she remained undeterred. Every piece of information gathered tonight, from behavioral patterns to potential links within the smuggling network, would guide her next moves. The first strike, executed with precision and control, had been both a lesson and a warning. The bar had witnessed it, had felt it, and had gained invaluable intelligence. The incident would ripple far beyond the walls of that establishment, shaping perceptions, strategies, and decisions in the hours and days to come. As she slipped into the night unseen, remained the quiet shadow she had always been. To most, she was just another patron leaving a bar. To she was a revelation he would never forget. To the network she was investigating, she was already a ghost, a presence moving through the shadows, gathering intelligence and preparing for the actions yet to come. The first strike had ended, but the mission, and the storm it would unleash, had only just begun. By the time the military police had secured the bar and separated the patrons, the weight of the incident had settled like a heavy fog. Stood composed, her posture unshakable, while Staff Sergeant Cole struggled to reconcile humiliation and confusion. His ego, bruised far beyond the physical pain he carried, fumed silently as he muttered under his breath. He had underestimated her, a fatal mistake. His friends hovered near him, half in loyalty, half in uncertainty, trying to determine what to do next. None of them had seen anyone handle aggression with such precise control before, and the realization that this was no ordinary civilian spread unease like wildfire. The door opened again, this time admitting Major Harrison, who had already been briefed on his presence and her undercover mission. His eyes scanned the scene, immediately landing on her. Recognition and concern flitted across his face as he approached. He said, voice low and urgent, "We need to speak privately." Nodded subtly, following him toward a quiet side room, leaving and his companions behind. The tension in the bar was palpable. Whispers rose, some admiring her skill, others questioning what had just transpired. Major Harrison closed the door, and the hum of the bar outside was replaced by a tense, anticipatory silence. "You handled that impressively," Harrison began, keeping his voice measured. "But do you realize the potential fallout? Is a liability, and you just made him, and everyone around him, fully aware of your presence." His calm gaze never wavered. "I anticipated his aggression. He tested me, and I used the opportunity to observe, collect information, and assess behavioral patterns. He's reckless, predictable, and connected to a network that may be involved in more than petty misconduct." Harrison frowned. "I know, but this was public. He was humiliated, and now others may be watching, talking. This could compromise the mission before it begins." Shook her head slightly. "No, Major. The opposite. The mission has advanced. His behavior revealed connections, tendencies, and vulnerabilities I could not have observed otherwise. He acted as a window into the network I've been tasked to investigate. Tonight, he inadvertently provided critical intelligence." Harrison exhaled, partially reassured but still concerned. "You're certain this won't spiral? You need to maintain discretion. Visibility is a risk you can't afford." "I'm aware," replied, her voice steady. "I've accounted for it. Nothing about me tonight exposed the full scope of my role. Now knows there's someone monitoring him, but he doesn't know my identity, my assignment, or the depth of my experience. He won't be able to trace it back without taking reckless actions, and if he does, it only confirms my suspicions and validates the intelligence I've collected." Harrison nodded slowly, weighing her words. He knew his reputation. She was meticulous, precise, and experienced beyond measure. Her ability to remain calm under pressure, to control volatile situations, was legendary within Special Forces circles. But seeing it firsthand still caused a twinge of concern. Any mission could be compromised if even one element went wrong. "All right," Harrison said finally. "What's your assessment of, and more importantly, the network you suspect he's connected to?" His eyes narrowed slightly, reviewing her observations from the bar. "Is reactive, impulsive, and loyal only to those who validate his ego. He is likely involved in the smuggling operation indirectly, or at least aware of certain activities. The way he acted tonight suggests he's used to asserting dominance and covering mistakes with aggression. His friends may also be connected, either as enablers or passive participants. The network extends beyond what we've confirmed, and I suspect higher-ranking personnel may be involved." Harrison's brow furrowed. "Higher-ranking personnel? Are you suggesting corruption within the base itself?" Nodded. "Not openly, but structurally. Maybe the surface-level manifestation of a deeper issue. He acts recklessly, but that recklessness may shield more significant operations from scrutiny. Observing him has already provided insight into who to watch and how they interact. The next step is careful surveillance and targeted intervention. Any premature exposure could collapse the network or alert its members." Harrison leaned back, rubbing his temple. "And you're confident your public display tonight didn't compromise that?" "I'm confident," said simply. "I controlled the encounter. Everyone who observed knows only what I allowed them to see. Believes he confronted someone ordinary. He has no idea who I truly am or what I'm capable of. The lesson he received was purely about behavior and caution, not identity." There was a pause as Harrison considered her words. He knew his reputation for precision, for reading people, and for making critical decisions under pressure. The bar incident had not only demonstrated her combat and tactical abilities, but also her mastery of psychology. By forcing into a public mistake, she had subtly revealed his tendencies, vulnerabilities, and connections without causing unnecessary casualties or alerting the broader network. "And the next step?" Harrison asked. His lips curved faintly. "Surveillance, observation, patience. Will likely try to regain control, assert dominance, or investigate who he believes interfered with him. That behavior will reveal more than any direct questioning. Meanwhile, I continue tracking the network. Tonight provided a blueprint of how individuals react under pressure, and that blueprint is invaluable. Harrison's expression softened slightly, but concern remained. You're taking a calculated risk exposing yourself publicly, even briefly. Are you prepared for the consequences? I am, said calmly. The mission requires it. Understanding human behavior under duress is just as important as neutralizing threats physically. Actions tonight have given us both insight and leverage. Harrison nodded. Then we proceed carefully. I'll handle the immediate fallout here at the bar. You continue your operation. If you require extraction or backup, you'll signal me. Inclined her head. Understood. She turned to leave, moving back into the shadows of the bar, unseen, unnoticed, as if she had never been there. Her presence, however, had left an indelible mark, and his friends remained, stunned, whispering among themselves. They had witnessed skill, authority, and control beyond ordinary comprehension. They had underestimated a woman in plain sight, and the lesson would resonate long after she had gone. As exited the bar, she reflected briefly on the encounter. It had been unexpected but instructive. Suggression had revealed more than her observations ever could have. It had confirmed suspicions about the network, highlighted vulnerabilities, and provided a subtle psychological advantage. The mission was advancing, not despite the confrontation, but because of it. Outside, the night was calm. The streets were quiet, illuminated by scattered lamplight and the glow of passing vehicles. Moved silently, blending with shadows, her senses alert to every movement, every sound, every potential threat. She had collected critical intelligence, assessed human behavior under pressure, and maintained control in a volatile situation. The bar incident was a success, both tactically and strategically. Yet, as she continued into the night, knew this was only the beginning. The confrontation had revealed threads that, if followed carefully, could unravel a network of criminal activity and corruption. But it also meant that more attention would inevitably come her way. Had seen her skill firsthand, and he would not forget it. His behavior, combined with the intelligence gathered, would shape the next moves in this complex operation. His mind was already moving ahead, calculating possibilities, anticipating reactions, and preparing for the next encounter. Her mission required patience, precision, and absolute control, and she had demonstrated all three tonight. The bar had been merely a testing ground, a proving ground, a stage for observation and analysis, and she had excelled. The night had passed without incident beyond the confrontation, but the consequences were just beginning to unfold. Disappeared into the shadows, a quiet, unseen force poised to strike when necessary, leaving behind a room full of Marines forever altered by the first public display of her formidable skill and presence. The night had given way to early morning, but remained awake, her mind alert, her senses honed as always. The encounter at the bar had provided unexpected insights, yet it also raised deeper questions. His reckless aggression had not been random, it was symptomatic. Had spent hours reviewing every detail she could recall, his body language, the way his friends reacted, subtle comments they made, even the timing of his movements. Each observation added a layer of understanding, painting a portrait of a man who was both dangerous and unknowingly revealing. She accessed a secure terminal in her, reviewing records, communication logs, and personnel reports. History showed patterns consistent with her observations: impulsive behavior, confrontational tendencies, and connections to minor infractions that were never fully addressed. On the surface, they appeared isolated, insignificant, but knew better. Networks like these, particularly within tightly structured organizations, often hid in plain sight. One reckless Marine could act as a conduit for much larger operations, and its behavior tonight had given her a starting point to trace those threads. Cross-reference these findings with recent intelligence reports on suspicious activity near the base, missing equipment, unusual transactions, and inconsistencies in duty logs. One pattern emerged clearly: was not the originator of illicit operations, but he was entangled with a network of personnel who were. His reckless aggression at the bar had been a signal, whether intentional or not, that exposed the network's periphery. Now had a blueprint of potential players and behaviors, an invaluable asset for the operation. The deeper she dug, the more unsettling the picture became. Evidence suggested that higher-ranking personnel might be involved, not overtly, but subtly, carefully masking oversight and turning a blind eye when necessary. Impulsive actions were likely overlooked by those above him, either because it served their interests or because it shielded them from scrutiny. The network extended further than she had anticipated, a web of influence, secrecy, and opportunism woven into the very fabric of the base's hierarchy. Didn't panic. In fact, the challenge invigorated her. Years of special forces training had prepared her for situations exactly like this: convoluted networks, unpredictable human behavior, and high stakes. Each discovery only sharpened her focus. Her mission was no longer about passive observation. It required careful intervention, intelligence collection, and precise timing. One wrong move could collapse the operation or alert the perpetrators. As dawn crept through the blinds, his mind replayed the bar incident. His aggression had been a gift, unintentional but significant. The shove, the challenge, and the subsequent chaos had exposed patterns she could exploit. His responses, combined with the reactions of his peers, had highlighted not only behavioral tendencies, but also the internal dynamics of the network. Some were loyal enablers, some passive observers, and some, were reckless actors whose ego could be leveraged strategically. Her first step was surveillance, had to ensure did not act impulsively or alert others to her presence. She positioned discreet monitoring devices around key locations, tracked his movements through secure channels, and began compiling behavioral profiles for everyone connected. Each detail mattered. The way a Marine approached a superior, the timing of interactions, even minor deviations from routine, all could provide insight into the network's inner workings. Hours passed in meticulous review. Training demanded nothing less than perfection. She reconstructed timelines, analyzed inconsistencies, and predicted potential moves. The deeper she delved, the more she understood the delicate balance within the group. Its reckless energy was a double-edged sword. It provided opportunities for intelligence collection, but also risked exposure if left unchecked. Managing him required subtlety, guiding his actions without making her presence known, letting him reveal patterns naturally while maintaining operational control. By mid-morning, had a plan. She would continue to monitor closely while identifying the network's higher-ranking elements. Surveillance, careful communication, and strategic observation would allow her to gather evidence without raising suspicion. The bar incident had been only the beginning. Each interaction, each seemingly minor event, could provide additional insight. His analysis revealed an unsettling detail. His friends and associates often acted in predictable patterns when under stress. The slightest provocation, carefully applied, could force them to reveal connections or motives. It was psychological leverage, subtle but powerful. By controlling the environment and letting them react naturally, could map the network without engaging in overt confrontation. Her patience and observation were as lethal as any weapon she carried. The day wore on, tracked movements through secure feeds, noting every meeting, every casual interaction. She compared it to her existing intelligence and identified weak points, locations, conversations, and behaviors that would be critical in uncovering the network. Her mind, trained for rapid calculation, operated in overdrive, predicting outcomes, adjusting strategies, and preparing contingencies. Finally, she identified the first actionable target, a meeting between a mid-level operative within the network. It was routine on the surface, a casual conversation in a secluded area, but knew it could yield critical information. She prepared herself meticulously, positioning cameras, mapping escape routes, and planning contingencies. Every detail mattered because one misstep could compromise months of work. As she observed from the shadows, noted how the operative deferred to in subtle ways, reinforcing his ego while revealing structural dynamics of the network. Small gestures, subtle eye contact, and microexpressions all painted a vivid picture. His patience paid off. The reckless Marine, unaware of the scrutiny, became a window into the operations she had been tracking. By late evening, had collected enough intelligence to identify patterns, behaviors, and potential vulnerabilities. Actions, combined with her observations, allowed her to connect him to higher-ranking personnel, as well as peripheral actors involved in the smuggling operation. The network was intricate, layered, and dangerous, but she now had the tools to dismantle it systematically. Leaned back in her chair, exhausted but satisfied. The bar incident had revealed more than physical capability. It had exposed human behavior, loyalty, and hierarchy within the network. She had learned not only who was but how he fit into the broader scheme of corruption. Her patience, skill, and discipline had turned a chaotic encounter into a tactical advantage. As night fell, she prepared for the next phase, direct observation of the network in motion. And his associates would continue to act, unaware that each step was being monitored, would remain in the shadows, a silent presence guiding the mission, collecting intelligence and preparing to neutralize threats when the time was right. Her reflection on the day was clear. The bar fight had been just a prelude. It had tested her skills, revealed weaknesses, and provided the insight needed to approach the network strategically. Now the real work began. Each thread she had uncovered had to be followed, each connection analyzed, and each risk managed. The web of corruption was extensive, but was meticulous, patient, and lethal in her precision. She was not merely observing. She was orchestrating a quiet dismantling of a dangerous operation, one calculated step at a time. The shadows outside her whispered promises of danger, opportunity, and revelation. Poised and resolute, prepared for the next stage of her mission. The network would continue to move, but she would be several steps ahead, silently unraveling the web of corruption before it could threaten anyone or compromise her mission. The night had descended with a quiet intensity over the outskirts of the city. Streetlights flickered faintly along the deserted roads, shadows stretching across empty parking lots and abandoned alleyways. Moved silently through the darkness, her senses heightened and every step deliberate. For hours she had tracked and his associates, noting patterns, calculating risk, and anticipating the exact moment when intervention would yield maximum intelligence without risking exposure. Tonight would not be another barroom test. It would be a critical confrontation, one that required both precision and timing. Had identified a rendezvous point where two mid-level operatives were meeting a third party, someone whose involvement in the network was suspected but unconfirmed. Surveillance showed the area was isolated, a nondescript warehouse on the edge of the industrial district. Security was minimal, but his cohorts were predictable. Careful planning had positioned her in the shadows across the street, using a series of hidden cameras, audio intercepts, and environmental observation to remain unseen while collecting every possible piece of intelligence. From her vantage point, she observed packing nervously, his ego barely concealing the tension beneath. He was aware he had been humiliated at the bar, and while he had attempted to regain composure in public, his frustration was evident in the jerky movements of his hands, the tapping of his boots against the concrete, and the tight set of his jaw. His companions mirrored his tension, glancing frequently over their shoulders, a mixture of caution and obedience in their movements. His mind calculated the potential outcomes of every interaction. She noted that impulsive and reactive would likely act first if provoked. The mid-level operatives, cautious but loyal, would follow his lead, creating a predictable chain of actions. This knowledge was critical. By understanding their patterns, could manipulate the encounter, drawing information and reactions without escalating into violence. The goal was intelligence, not confrontation. Minutes stretched into tension-filled eternity. Then the third party arrived, a shadowy figure whose presence confirmed suspicions. This was not merely a casual meeting but a transaction, potentially involving smuggling operations linked to his network. Eyes narrowed. Every detail mattered. The briefcase exchanged, the hand signals, the timing of conversation pauses. She cataloged it all, her brain moving faster than any of the participants could comprehend. Took the lead, speaking in low tones, gesturing aggressively at his companions. He believed himself in control, the orchestrator of the meeting, but knew better. She recognized the subtleties of his body language, the overcompensation meant to mask nervousness. Each micro-expression revealed insecurity, a flaw she could exploit to gain intelligence. Then came the moment. Reached for the briefcase, an impulsive motion revealing both greed and recklessness. Reacted, not physically but tactically, activating a remote device that allowed her to monitor the conversation without being detected. Her calm, measured control from a distance ensured she remained a ghost in the operation, and his associates had no idea they were being observed in real time by a highly trained operative capable of reading their every move. A minor dispute erupted, an argument over timing, money, or trust. His impulsive tendencies flared, his voice rising, his gestures becoming erratic. Noted every word, every intonation, every hesitation. The mid-level operatives tried to intervene, to mediate, but ego dominated, revealing exactly how the network functioned. A hierarchy maintained not by strategy but by bravado and fear. The critical point arrived when, frustrated, threatened one of the operatives. His mind calculated the exact moment to step in. She could not expose herself, but she could manipulate the environment to elicit reactions. Using subtle acoustic devices, she projected a faint sound from the opposite side of the warehouse, causing the operatives to glance toward the perceived disturbance. Startled and impulsive, shifted his focus, his attention divided. It was the opening had been waiting for. She activated a series of surveillance cameras, capturing every detail, facial expressions, hand movements, and the flow of information between participants. The intelligence collected was invaluable. Its recklessness had inadvertently exposed patterns, loyalties, and vulnerabilities within the network, providing with the proof needed for strategic action. Minutes passed with controlled tension. Attempted to regain authority, waving his hands, gesturing, and raising his voice. Observed silently, recording, calculating, and analyzing. The third party grew impatient, sensing the instability in its leadership. Their subtle frustration provided with additional insight. The chain of command within the network was fragile, dependent on the ego and impulsiveness of individuals alike. Suddenly attempted to assert dominance physically, reaching toward the operative he had threatened. Acted, not with force but with precision manipulation of the environment. A strategically timed light flicker from an adjacent control panel caused to startle, his movement halted mid-gesture. The operative he had threatened instinctively stepped back, their reactions caught on recording devices. The chain of causality was perfect. Behavior, influenced indirectly, revealed not only his tendencies but also the dynamics of those around him. His patience and precision allowed her to gather actionable intelligence without any direct engagement, and his associates believed they were operating in privacy, unaware that a skilled operative was observing, calculating, and analyzing every move. By the end of the night, had mapped the network structure, identified key participants, and uncovered patterns that would allow her to dismantle the operation strategically. As dawn approached, from her observation point, the operation had been a success, had been revealed as a reckless linchpin, the mid-level operatives had been exposed as enablers, and the higher-level connections had been hinted at through subtle behavioral cues. Its meticulous planning, patience, and control had turned a volatile situation into a wealth of intelligence, setting the stage for the final phase of the mission. Returning to her, reviewed the footage and notes. Each movement, gesture, and spoken word had been cataloged, providing a comprehensive picture of the network. Oblivious to the full scope of observation, had unwittingly contributed to the dismantling of the very system he served. His mind moved ahead, already planning the next steps, intervention, confrontation, and the eventual neutralization of threats within the network. By mid-morning, she had prepared a report for Major Harrison, detailing the network structure, key operatives, vulnerabilities, and behavioral patterns. The critical confrontation had provided all the data needed for strategic action. While still a danger, had been contained indirectly through observation and tactical manipulation. Its reflection was simple. Control, patience, and observation were as effective as physical force. By understanding human behavior, exploiting predictability, and maintaining invisibility, she had turned a potentially explosive situation into a tactical advantage. The network had been exposed, its dynamics understood, and its vulnerabilities mapped, all without a single direct confrontation. As she prepared for the next stage of the mission, knew the stakes were higher than ever, and his associates would continue their activities, but now she had the leverage to anticipate, manipulate, and neutralize threats strategically. The critical confrontation had been a turning point, transforming chaos into intelligence and danger into opportunity. The mission was far from over, but had once again proven why underestimating her was a mistake few could survive. The city slept under a blanket of fog, its streets silent except for the occasional hum of distant traffic. Moved like a shadow, silent and deliberate, her every step calculated. The past nights had been in observation, patience, and manipulation. Reckless and impulsive had been exposed, his network of mid-level operatives mapped, higher-ranking connections suspected and documented. Tonight, the mission would reach its climax. Every piece of intelligence, every observed behavior, and every carefully set trap would converge. Approached the warehouse district once more, though this time with purpose. Surveillance had indicated a key transfer was scheduled. Contraband, likely tied to the smuggling network, had been entangled with. Security was heavier than expected, but nothing could not handle. Every camera, every guard, every patrol had been accounted for. She moved through shadows, her presence invisible to all but the most vigilant. Inside the warehouse paced, unaware that his every move had been recorded and analyzed. His earlier encounters at the bar and subsequent surveillance had left him restless. He had no idea that he was walking into a controlled environment, designed meticulously by someone far more skilled than himself. Had learned to manipulate environments without touching them, to influence outcomes with precision, and tonight would unknowingly be her instrument. As met with two mid-level operatives and the shadowy supplier, observed from a hidden vantage point. Every movement, gesture, and word was noted. The network was predictable, ego-driven, reactive, and sloppy in their overconfidence. In particular was the weak link, impulsive, easily provoked, and unable to control his associates effectively. This predictability would be critical. His plan was simple yet precise. She had coordinated with Major Harrison and a tactical response team stationed nearby, ready to intervene at her signal. Her role was to observe, guide, and ensure the operation unfolded exactly as intended. The intelligence she had collected over the previous days allowed her to anticipate every possible outcome. Timing, control, and subtlety would be everything. The meeting inside the warehouse escalated quickly. Eager to assert dominance after the humiliation at the bar, attempted to take the lead, gesturing aggressively and raising his voice. Noted the reactions. The mid-level operatives exchanged nervous glances. The supplier remained calm but wary, and overconfidence was palpable. Each micro-expression confirmed her earlier assessments. The network thrived on bravado, and its hierarchy was fragile. At the critical moment, signaled her team. Tactical lights illuminated the perimeter, and the military police entered with precision. The network members froze, caught between panic and confusion. His mouth opened to protest, but the sight of uniformed authority and the precision of their approach left him stunned. However, remained in the shadows, watching, analyzing, and ready to intervene directly if needed. The confrontation was swift, and his associates were detained without resistance. Stepped forward only briefly, revealing herself too. His eyes widened in recognition and shock. He now understood fully who had bested him at the bar and who had orchestrated the unraveling of his network. "You underestimated me," said calmly, her voice low and controlled. "You made mistakes, and your impulsiveness exposed more than you realized." Still shaking from a mixture of fear and humiliation, could only stammer, I didn't know, I didn't realize." His eyes met his with quiet intensity. "You still don't, and that's the difference between us. I plan, I observe, I control. You react, you act recklessly, and you expose yourself. Tonight proves it again." The mid-level operatives were processed, statements taken, and evidence collected. Every interaction had, every aggressive gesture, and every word spoken over the previous nights had been documented and analyzed. His meticulous observation and control ensured nothing was left to chance. The network had been neutralized systematically, without unnecessary violence, and with full preservation of evidence to ensure accountability. Once the operation concluded, met with Major Harrison to debrief. Maps, recordings, and behavioral analyses were laid out in meticulous detail. Every step from the bar incident to the warehouse confrontation had been documented. Harrison nodded, impressed and relieved. "You turned chaos into intelligence and intelligence into action. The mission is a success." Allowed herself a brief exhale. There was satisfaction in the accomplishment, but no sense of arrogance. Special Forces training taught that the mission was never truly over until every threat was neutralized, every vulnerability addressed, and every outcome anticipated. Tonight, she had achieved all three, and his associates were contained, the network dismantled, and the intelligence gathered would prevent future breaches. As dawn approached fully, walked through the now quiet streets, the city awoke unaware of the dangers that had been neutralized, the threats that had been dismantled, and the calculated interventions that had ensured safety. To the casual observer, nothing had happened. To those involved in the network, everything had changed. It was another mission completed, another demonstration of skill, patience, and precision. She reflected briefly on his behavior. Impulsive, ego-driven, and reckless, he had been a liability, a weakness in the network that ultimately led to its exposure. Yet his actions had provided critical intelligence, allowing her to anticipate moves, plan responses, and orchestrate the final neutralization of the network. The bar incident, the surveillance, and the confrontation had all been threads in a carefully woven plan that had now come to fruition. His mind, however, remained alert. The operation was complete, but in her line of work, vigilance never ceased. There were always new threats, new networks, and new challenges. Tonight had been a victory, but the next mission would demand the same precision, control, and patience. As she reached her, allowed herself a small smile. She had remained unseen, in control, and always several steps ahead. And his associates had been neutralized without unnecessary confrontation, yet their actions had exposed a network that could have caused significant harm. Her presence had turned impulsiveness into an advantage, chaos into intelligence, and vulnerability into opportunity. Entered her movements deliberate and calm. The city outside stirred to life, unaware of the quiet storm that had passed through its streets. She had completed her mission, neutralized threats, gathered intelligence, and ensured that those who underestimated her would never forget the consequences. Now contained and humbled, would carry the lesson of underestimation for the rest of his career. It was a reminder that skill, observation, and patience were the true weapons of a Special Forces operative. Physical strength could intimidate, but intelligence, strategy, and precision controlled outcomes. As the sun rose, casting golden light over the city, allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. She had faced aggression, chaos, and unpredictability, and had emerged in control. The network had been dismantled, the threats neutralized, and justice served. And she had done it all while remaining unseen, untouchable, and unchallenged. The mission was complete, the storm had passed, and remained a silent guardian, a shadow in the night, a force no one would underestimate again.